Welcome to Beyond Disruption, where you'll learn how emerging tech is changing the world of accounting, business, and finance. Our guest experts break down the latest news in everything from blockchain to robotics, artificial intelligence to human intelligence. Tune in to find out how you can stay ahead of the curve.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast series, helping finance professionals take advantage of the growing opportunities emerging technologies present to finance functions and their organisations to stay ahead of the curve. I'm Samantha Watson, based in our London office, and today we'll be talking to guest expert Maneesh Juneja about staying relevant as machines get smarter. Maneesh Juneja is a digital health futurist who explores the convergence of emerging technologies to see how they can make the world a healthier and happier place. He looks at these technologies in the context of socio-cultural, political and economic trends, helping organisations around the world to think differently about the future. He is passionate about ensuring that the choices we make in society result in a better future, not just for the privileged few, but for everyone. Maneesh has also given keynote speeches about the future around the globe to leaders in different organisations, from pharmaceutical companies to insurers to hospitals. You can find links and more information in our show notes, which you can view inside your podcast app or by going to gobeyonddisruption.com. So Maneesh,
hello Samantha.
What is the key message you are being asked to deliver to leaders?
So often the people who are getting me in are leading innovation teams, or they're responsible for new business models, new ways of doing things, and they're bringing me in to basically persuade their leadership team or their board that the future is likely to be very different. Change is already happening. Innovation is coming from unexpected places, whether it's startups, students, different parts of the globe, not necessarily English-speaking rich countries, for example. And the message is really to get the audience to understand that the technology is the easy part. What's the most difficult thing here in any organization is the long-term cultural change. So actually getting some big data, getting some AI, getting some new things running in the organization is relatively easy and quick. The real challenge is, how do you, as leaders, as human leaders, how do you win the hearts and minds of employees and contractors in your organization, whether you're national or global, and really get everybody on board with your future strategy in terms of where you're trying to head towards, so that actually your organization is going to leverage these new technologies as well as you can.
Your work has always involved looking at data and how insights from data can improve decision-making across several industries. What client types do you mainly work with, and what challenges or opportunities do you typically put forward to help them pave the way?
Okay, so typically when I'm working with different clients, I'll give you an example. This week I was working with a global organization that wants my insights on my predictions for how we will be living in 50 years' time from the perspective of health and well-being. So will we be having self-driving cars that give us medical checkups, for example, on the way to the office? What kind of data might be collected in 50 years' time from our bed, from our office? What will our employer know about our health before even our doctor knows, for example? So in terms of challenges and opportunities, then a lot of it is down to, well, fundamentally, what will my customers of tomorrow, of the future, be needing from me? And if I work backwards to my organization today and the structure and my offerings and the value I'm offering, what's the gap there? And what do I need to do in order to get to a point where I'm not just as an organization prepared for 3 years' time, which is, for example, the end of my contract as CEO, but actually, how can I structure the organization now and start making some changes so that even in 20 years' time, this organization is able to provide whatever the market wants, whatever customers require in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, so that actually it's not even a case of just surviving as an organization over the long term, but surviving and prospering.
Your business relationships are built on the triple foundation of trust, honesty, and mutual respect. What's this got to do with data, and why is it so important right now?
Well, it's always been important for me working in using data for making better decisions in different organizations. Because one of the challenges has been wherever I've worked in different organizations and they have multiple data sets, and depending upon whether you go to the business intelligence team or the statistics team, you may get different versions of the truth. And essentially organizations are looking for, they've collected this data or they've acquired data and they're looking for a single version of the truth that they can rely upon to make decisions in business, or if they're in public sector, in that respect. And so when it comes to trust, honesty and mutual respect, this is going to become even more important when it comes to data, because when it comes to, say, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these new systems and new technologies, they are going to require a lot more data and a lot more linked data from different sources. But more importantly, the ability of those technologies to help you with decision making relies upon training those systems using existing data sets that you've got or that you're collecting. And so then you need to be able to trust, how did we acquire that data? Is that data accurate? Does everybody believe that the data that we're using to train these AI systems, is it being the algorithms being trained in an ethical manner? Are they going to introduce further bias in our organization when we're then advising our clients in terms of financial decisions compared to, say, humans before? Now we're using data exclusively to drive our recommendations in terms of financial planning, etc. And we're not entirely sure that the machines are advising to the same ethical and honest standard that we have done as human beings.
Let's talk about what your data and research is telling us about the near future from an accountant or financial advisor's perspective. What has this told us about how we'll need to balance our skill sets in new ways?
So that's a great question. So just like in healthcare, where I believe over the long term, the next 20, 30 years, even though there's an acute shortage of healthcare professionals today, the emergence of these machines and how they're evolving could well mean that we don't need as many healthcare professionals over the long term. So in the case of finance and accountancy, your audience need to be prepared for a future where there's less demand for human accountants and finance professionals. And so the ones that still around and still can be employed, what are the skills that they need to remain competitive and to stay relevant to their customers? And it's not only the soft skills like empathy, creativity, compassion, kindness that are the preserve of human beings, but it's also the digital skills. Will they by default need to know machine learning and AI? Will they need to know about robotics? Will they need to know about the ethics of using AI in business? At what level of detail will they need to know? Will some of them need to actually know this in detail because they might be actually becoming an accountant who ends up building some of this new technology and providing services as a startup to finance organizations around the world? The other thing I want to quickly mention in this answer, a key point here is about trust. So even though a lot of the research is showing that not just in healthcare or finance, but these algorithms and these machines and the AI is able to do certain tasks faster than humans in a more accurate manner in these test after test. But in the real world, I think from a customer perspective, customers are going to want to know, how can I trust that if I'm accountancy firm ABC and you're introducing a new service to your customers with a chatbot or some device using a smart speaker or something even automatically running in the background with machines, how can I trust that given I've always worked with my human accountant Steve for the past 10 years and I've built up a level of trust with him, I've built up a relationship, and suddenly you're expecting me to trust this machine just because you're saying we've launched it?
Disruption never stops and things are always changing.
Yeah.
So in the context of the work that you do, what was the last big disruption you saw in your profession and how did it change the organisations you were working with?
I think it's actually about chatbots. And I'm looking at healthcare, but I believe this applies to finance as well. So we've got a situation around the world where a lot of people can't access professional services in healthcare because they're 100 kilometers from the nearest hospital or clinic, for example, but they do have a phone that's connected to the internet. And so now we're seeing the emergence of chatbots that have been developed to help people living with mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, or even not even help them diagnose, but actually just help them understand their feelings and thoughts and provide some kind of basic levels of treatment to help them in that situation. And so what's really profound is that technology is enabling all these people around the world who never had access before to these services from human beings, because either humans didn't want to work in those areas, or there wasn't enough profit, or they were too far. It was in a village, for example. Now they can access it through these chatbots, and it's 24 hours, 7 days a week. So this ability for consumers generally to get basic information without having to phone a human being, visit somebody, a professional in their office, this is a really profound shift. So then I was thinking about the accountant that I use myself, and I was thinking that they prefer that I email any questions and they respond within the same day. But a lot of my questions are very simple, such as, here's my sales data for the past quarter. Please calculate my VAT for the last quarter. And I think a lot of that communication could be done by a chatbot or a machine or a virtual assistant, leaving my accountant there to focus on more complex tasks and actually to be able to use much more of the skills that they've gained during their education and professional training.
When we first met, you told me about the story of baby Annabel. Could you share that again with our listeners?
Absolutely.
And outline what it tells us about where we are now and where we're headed in our personal and professional lives?
So this is a story I read in the newspaper in the Daily Record in May of this year. It's really profound for me because it illustrates how things are changing and we don't even realize it. So essentially, there was an 11-month-old baby girl called Annabel in Devon, and she was about to say her first word, and her parents were excited. They're getting the camera ready to capture her first word. So they're expecting her to say something along the lines of mummy, daddy, something like that, that denotes that those are her parents and her primary bond in life so far. And they're really surprised when she was uttering her first word and they're recording it. And it turns out that her first word was Alexa, which is the wake-up word that you use when you're using Amazon's Echo smart speaker for asking for the news or the weather. Now, Annabel, who's 11 months old, has never said a word yet, had watched her older brother Lucas, who's 3 years old, for the last 3 months, playing with Amazon's Echo smart speaker device. So it made me think, the reason it's a profound shift is Annabel is 11 months old now. As she grows up, and when she starts to become a consumer and buy services herself, interact with different organizations, given that from the beginning, she may trust these AI and virtual assistants and these machines from different companies like Amazon, she may trust them more than any other human being, even her parents, her friends, her family, her boyfriend, etc., her teachers, everybody around her in society. So when it comes to organizations right now that are saying, oh, we need to sort of digitally transform, we need to add chatbots, we need to do this, most people are thinking, well, let's basically our core focus and our core operating model is to do what we've been doing already with a little bit of digital veneer on top. And we can say, voila, we've digitally transformed the business. But they're not really thinking that far ahead, that actually Annabel and her cohort of 11-month-old babies that are growing up right now, as they grow up and they're getting used to trusting these machines potentially for certain things, in 15 years' time, 20 years' time, when Annabel is needing financial advice or choosing an accountant, personally or professionally, she and others like her may say, well, we are always going to award business to machines first, or service companies that have accountancy and financial services provided by machines, because that's what we've grown up trusting. That's what we prefer. It's faster, it's easier. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that organizations thinking now about how do we prepare, what do we build, need to build systems now that can adapt and prepare for changing consumer trends in 15 to 20 years' time.
So what does that mean in practice?
That means in practice, as just like in healthcare, I'm seeing the people in the profession and the organizations that survive and prosper, have to move to some kind of virtual assistance model using AI. Now, whether it becomes mandatory because in the case of medicine, it's safer for some patients to use a chatbot or virtual assistant because there's reduced chance of medical error compared to a human healthcare professional, or whether in finance, the regulators say, well, for this first stage of interaction in terms of all this first level of accountancy work, in 10 years' time in the UK, they say, right, it always has to be a machine that works with the human customer, because we've now proven that the machines are much less riskier in terms of the basic financial advice they give rather than human beings, right? It could also mean in practice how much involvement is going to be required from the accounting profession, just like in healthcare where people are saying, well, how can we use machines to nudge people to optimal health so that all their daily choices and their decisions to whether they're having an ice cream in the store, whether they're sleeping less, for example, whether they're choosing to go to the gym or not. And again, in finance, with all these systems in the future maybe nudging us to optimal financial health, accountants and finance professionals are going to have to transition into new roles. So yes, some accountants will probably lose their jobs, but then some accountants, provided they are thinking ahead, will learn new skills and work out actually, well, these machines or organizations using these machines in finance are going to possibly, there's going to be new roles such as algorithmic bias auditor or machine risk officer, relating to how these algorithms are being created, what data they're being used, they're using in the organization to come up with these decisions. And then it's about trust, about ethics, and actually ethically aligned design of these new automated systems in finance. And I think that's a huge opportunity, not just in finance, but in any industry, for those individuals who say, well, actually, okay, I'm trained as this professional, I've got all my credentials, but actually I see things changing in the future such that I need to go and learn a bit more about the ethics of machine learning and these algorithms and how I can then maybe apply and create the position in my company. I want to be the algorithmic bias auditor for my organization, and I'm going to be the first accountant that's even thought about that. And I've created new value, new ways of doing business and new business models. And additionally, I want to say that it's going to be as well, not just about those who are already working, who are already qualified, but if you've got those organizations that are creating the professional education programs for these financial qualifications, those curricula, those syllabi need to change as well. Again, just like I mentioned, it could be that some people on this pathway in education in financial services say, I don't want to just learn the accountancy, I want to learn the ethics of AI, but also I want to learn how to build AI as well, because potentially I want to be a new hybrid accountant individual that I can go out there and provide these new services that organizations maybe don't even realize they need from finance professionals.
We'll continue our conversation shortly as we discuss some practical steps to turn disruption into opportunity. This is the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. You can find out more about this podcast and about the rest of our wider project at gobeyonddisruption.com. So Maneesh,
yes,
if when will the robots take my job is the wrong question, what's the right one?
The right one, and I get asked this a lot by people in healthcare who say, as a doctor or as a nurse, when will robots take my job? So I think the right question is, how do I stay relevant to my customers' needs? And this is regardless of what happens in the 21st century and in your career, whatever technology comes about. I think fundamentally that asking yourself that question every day, how do I stay relevant to my customers' needs, is a much more appropriate one than when will the robots take my job? Because the problem is with the when will the robots take my job narrative, it's been perpetuated by the media, who make it sound like there's going to be an onslaught of machines taking all our jobs in the next 12 months. And the other problem with that question of when will robots take my job is that it leaves us in a position of fear. And I believe our best decisions as humans are taken not when we have to respond from a mindset of fear, but when we respond with a mindset of courage. So that's again why I like that question of how can I stay relevant to my customers?
Looking at what's happening now, would you outline some practical steps to help the affected sectors of our profession turn the current changes into opportunities, and what should we not overlook?
Great. So I think it's important to understand what's happening globally. So could it be your customers might be very happy, but if companies out there, say China, India, are coming up with new ways to interact with their customers globally, to offer new services in accounting, and they're doing it faster, easier, cheaper, and you're not even aware of that. So it's understanding what's happening globally. But going back to, again, from an accountancy perspective, listening to your customers, what do they actually want in terms of financial advice and decision making? When do they want it? Where do they want it? And I also think in terms of what you shouldn't be overlooking here is really about going back to trust. So fundamentally, I think this is where humans are always going to be in the loop in terms of your customers are going to require a certain level of trust, especially if it comes to dealing with their finances, or in the case of healthcare, with your health. And I think what we shouldn't be overlooking is what happens when things go wrong. So there'll be organizations out there that quickly deploy AI, digital chatbots, whatever, in finance. And what they're not really thinking about is what happens when things go wrong? What happens when a decision is made by the machine and the customer then uses that information to make their own decisions, and that decision was flawed, it was found out to be wrong? Who's liable? And so that's a big problem in healthcare. Like if you have a chatbot and it advises you, well, there's no need to go to the hospital for treatment, you can just take an aspirin at home. Now, people in healthcare are very worried about, well, as more people use these chatbots, etc., and virtual assistants, the regulators aren't even able to advise on what's the process for, who do we blame? Do we blame when things go wrong? Do we blame the individual healthcare professional? Do we blame the person who developed the algorithm? Do we blame the person in procurement who signed the contract to get the algorithm on board? Do we blame the CEO of the company because they should have been aware of this? So this is a really interesting area because it's very challenging, but also it requires, going back to accountancy, it's going to require people from your audience to step up and say, well, this is kind of like a vague area. Nobody's even thinking about this yet. I want to create a solution, or I want to work with the professional associations to find ways to address this problem of what to do when the machines get it wrong.
So you've mentioned seeing professional associations in healthcare feel very threatened by changes as machines become able to do certain tasks in a faster and more accurate manner than the human healthcare professionals. This is causing a lot of fear and mistrust in that industry. How should individuals and organisations cope with this culture of fear?
So the real challenge here is not just that the machines are getting better, because actually machines and automation have been getting better over the years, even before this recent developments in AI. I think the real problem is the long-term cultural change of organizations in terms of adapting to change and becoming more agile in how they respond to changing external environment. And fundamentally, it boils down to human leadership in terms of, if you do have strong, courageous leaders with a bold vision for the future, regardless of all these external threats, I believe, the best innovations, the best ideas have come from humans in the past, and they'll continue to come from humans. And so it's those essential human qualities of strong, bold leadership that is going to actually help organizations navigate and prepare for the future and overcome all this fear and mistrust. And I think, again, it's also about remembering, as I mentioned earlier, I think the most value that we are going to be able to add in accountancy and in finance are when leaders and organizations and people understand, well, so we have machines that are able to do these tasks very well. Let's use that resource in an optimal manner. But we also have humans that are able to do certain things very well and better than machines will ever be able to do. So let's optimally allocate that resource. And going back to when I mentioned earlier about, well, in the case of a chatbot, freeing up the time of that finance professional, that accountant, to be able to focus on actually complex tasks and actually on tasks that utilize a full range of their training, so that they're not stuck doing boring, mundane things which they are overtrained for.
Your baby Annabel's story told us something about where we're heading now.
Yeah.
So let's get further ahead of the curve. Based on your analysis, what will our lives be like in the next 50 years?
Oh gosh, well, interestingly enough, Samantha, I've just been asked that question for a recent client engagement. How will we be living in the year 2069 and how it relates to health and well-being? So I think that technology, data and machines will be much more integrated into our daily lives, and there'll be so much that we will be able to do because of the technological shifts yet to come. So whether it's things like it's our self-driving car conducting a medical checkup on our commute to the office, or even us as an individual consumer having thousands of virtual agents optimizing our investment portfolio by canvassing the globe and determining where the best financial investments are. So there are huge changes ahead. But imagine a future where a child growing up today and they trust machines for advice more than humans. What kinds of services and products will they be willing to pay for in 50 years' time as they approach retirement? But going back to that, again, the technology is going to shift such that 1 in 3 children born today will reach 100 years old in the UK. So what does that mean again for people in your audience, as in how can they potentially develop new services that help people navigate a future where there may be people who never retire because they're so healthy and they choose to, they can work for as long as they want. Or it could be that actually there's such a big challenge with the aging population that we are going to require new ways of financing for social care and nursing homes and actually getting older, not just here in the UK, but globally. This is a big challenge for healthcare. So again, that links back to accountancy and technology and finance. How can accountants and finance professionals play a much bigger role in supporting society where we have aging populations, where we have a lot more technology, and we're going to need these new financing options and models, whether it's consumers or governments or local councils, or even employers, in terms of actually paying for retirement and paying for caring for us when we get older. Is it going to be the case that somebody in your audience works out a scheme where because in a lot of countries, it's looking like there'll be domestic care robots because there's not enough people to care for old people, so they're turning to care robots in Japan. So maybe there's new ways of financing that your members can come up with that allow these care robots to be paid for once you need them.
Before we wrap up, let's do some signposting. For anyone who'd like to find out more about this topic in general and about your work in particular, what are some resources you'd recommend and where can they find you online?
Okay, so I have my own website, which is maneeshjuneja.com. I blog there, and you can also find me on Twitter, LinkedIn and YouTube. I regularly post content based upon what I'm seeing in terms of future trends. However, in terms of are there some online resources I can recommend, like websites and etc., I have to say that the bulk of my knowledge that I've acquired and continue to acquire comes from Twitter. So you can engage in conversation with people in various fields, not just in artificial intelligence, but you can engage with these people from around the globe, and Twitter is how I mostly find out about emerging trends, as well as physically going to different conferences around the world. I'd encourage you not just to go to conferences or even look at Twitter feeds about accountancy, but also just look more broadly about what's happening in the world in general. And if you're not on Twitter, I think you should create an account today, even if it's just to listen. But it may open up many more opportunities for you in terms of possibly even new career opportunities, because as an independent consultant, all of my new business comes through Twitter, as in people contact me because they've seen me posting on Twitter, or they've seen me in a conversation on Twitter and said, like, I really like how you think. I like the ideas you're coming up with.
Finally, do you have one message you'd like to leave for accounting and finance professionals that will help them go beyond disruption?
I want to basically say that it's about understanding what's happening across sectors. So many of the solutions, and just as I mentioned about the care robots earlier, many of the solutions to society's problems will require cross-sector thinking, cross-cultural thinking. It may be that you're in the UK or you're in the Philippines, wherever you happen to be, but especially with all these new ways of working and the internet and remote working, and the desire that organizations are looking for solutions around the world from all sorts of people, all sorts of places. What's stopping you from, as an accounting and finance professional, whether you're on your own as part of an organization, being in one part of the world, but actually creating a solution that could potentially impact everybody on the planet? But in order to do that, I believe you're going to have to be agile enough to update your skills on a continual basis, so lifelong learning. You're going to have to go to all sorts of different events in your local area, like a meetup. You're going to have to listen to a podcast like this. You're going to have to go onto Twitter. You're going to have to see where these new ideas are coming from. But then also, on top of that, it's not just about acquiring new skills and updating your skills, but you also have to know from an emotional perspective, when to let go of certain skills which are no longer in demand, and then make the decision to acquire new skills which are now in demand, such as it could be the whole thing about ethics and trust in AI, and how you can now be seen as a leader in your area or your organization, because you're going to be the first person who's leading a committee looking at the trust of chatbots for your financial services organization.
Thank you, Maneesh. I think we have plenty covered for today's episode, staying relevant as machines get smarter. There is plenty more to explore, so we'll make sure our show notes include links to all of the resources we've mentioned. Just click on the episode's info icon in your podcast app. There are also 2 other websites we'd recommend for listeners interested in taking this further, and that's the AICPA-store.com/go beyond disruption and the CGMA-store.com/go beyond disruption. You'll find courses, webinars, and more professional development resources, which are consistently updated to keep you ahead of the curve. Thanks again to our guest, Maneesh Juneja.
Thanks, Samantha.
I'm Samantha Watson, and we'll be back soon with more conversations that help you and your profession to go beyond disruption. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at AICPA-CIMA.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.